Now, I follow the Cleveland Browns extensively, know this team very well, know this roster very well. But I got to be honest with you. For people trying to claim that the Cleveland Browns are the 32nd worst roster in the NFL, I got to be honest, that's a little bit too much. This team, they may not be great in 2025, but they are certainly not the worst roster in the NFL. We'll talk about it. Browns 3D on the OBR begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, and all of us here at the OBR appreciate all the support, whether it is reading the written content daily from a fantastic group of writers or joining us on the OBR streaming network every evening beginning at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D. Tuesday night, you will have Brad Ward. You will have Pete Smith for the React following at 7 o'clock. And I know Mike is out of town, but there will still be a little mini version of Garage Beers at around 9, so stick around for that as well. We'll get to the roster thing in a minute. Again, I'm going to talk about this same thing. With the Shedeur Sanders draft slide, guys, it's 6 weeks ago now. He is in OTAs. He has basically ingratiated himself within the city of Cleveland, in the community and the surrounding areas. The one person who should be aggravated and agitated about the draft slide is Shedeur Sanders. The one person who seems to have put it all in the past and is now focusing on the present and the future is Shedeur Sanders. It's got to stop. Let's just let the kid be. It cannot be undone. It cannot be unwritten. And all this kid wants to do is come in and show basically everybody that the naysayers were wrong. Just let the kid be. Just let the kid compete. Now, Browns did hold an OTA session today, closed to the media. However, Browns were certainly nice enough to, release some highlights. And, some highlights for Kenny Pickett, highlights for Shedeur Sanders, highlights for Dylan Gabriel. Apparently, there was an interception and a tip ball from Joe Flacco that ended up in the hands of Jordan Hicks. Carson Swessinger appeared to be getting reps with the first team. I do want to basically put an asterisk on that. It appears that Devin Bush was in Pennsylvania today, addressing the beginning stages of his transgressions, which led to certainly legal trouble a month ago. Still no word from the Cleveland Browns on if or any punishment is coming from them. I guess just now we're sitting in the spot of maybe waiting to let the legal portion take place. I love PFF, a lot of good friends over there. But I'm not going to believe for a second that right now the Cleveland Browns have the 32nd best roster in the NFL. Let's be honest. All of us would take any one of these 4 quarterbacks, Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, over Deshaun Watson in a heartbeat. Every single one of us would do it. So if you're trying to say that maybe any of these quarterbacks are not on par with Deshaun Watson, you're not getting that past a Cleveland Browns fan. Absolutely not. We sat here for 3 years, willed, begged, prayed to try to get this thing to come to existence, that he was going to be some shell of a former star quarterback that he was. And in all honesty, he was worse at the end of 2024. It just never got better. He got worse. It's legitimate. So therefore, looking by where this roster is right now as to basically where it was a year ago, got to be honest, Quarterback, I'd take what I have now as opposed to what they had last year. The running back position. Last year at this time, it was pretty much just Jerome Ford. And the hopes, that Nick Chubb was, going to once again miraculously overcome a major, devastating knee injury. Now we sit here with Jerome Ford, Quinshon Judkins, and Dylan Sampson. Would I take the way the Browns running back room sits here today as opposed to one calendar year ago? Absolutely. I 100% would. The wide receiver room. I think last year at this time, we all thought Amari Cooper was going to have yet another good season in which we all figured would be his final year with the Cleveland Browns. Obviously did not go that way. Jerry Jeudy certainly played a lot better than I think any of us anticipated in his first year with the Cleveland Browns. Cedric Tillman, there were some signs, small ones, a small amount of signs, but there were signs nonetheless. I'll take the wide receiver room yesterday versus today, and I'll give a slight edge to the wide receiver room last year. I don't think any of us saw that Amari Cooper's game was going to fall off the cliff like it did. The tight end room. David Njoku is David Njoku. Last year in that room with him was Jordan Akins. This year in that room as number 2, Harold Fannin Jr. I'll take this room today as opposed to the way it was currently constructed one calendar year ago today. The offensive line. We know Joe Bitonio is healthy. We know Ethan Posick is healthy. We know Wyatt Teller is healthy. We know Jack Conklin is healthy. We know DeJuan Jones is healthy. So this offensive line, well, and not even mentioning DeJuan Jones over Jed Wills, but the offensive line right now today, as opposed to the offensive line 1 year ago today, you're taking the offensive line. You absolutely are. The defensive line. You had Zadarius Smith a year ago at this time. The defensive tackle a year ago were a little more proven, had a little more track record under them. So I could maybe see where you say the defensive line today is maybe a step back from where it was 1 year ago. But again, none of this shapes up to this being the 32nd worst roster in the NFL. Jordan Hicks, Devin Bush, Carson Schlesinger, Jerome Baker. Last year at this time, it was JOK, and it was Hicks. Last year, certainly probably better because of JOK. But it doesn't mean that Jerome Baker and Carson Schlesinger can be viable pieces to the Cleveland Browns defense here in 2025. Cornerback room is essentially the same today as it was calendar year ago. So I don't even know how to equate that. But still, again, not making up for this team being, the 32nd worst roster in the NFL. The safety room, Juan Thornhill wasn't thought of much a year ago at this time. I think we were all hoping he would have a better year too. He most certainly didn't. But either way, I would, again, I would say this is a wash because you just don't know what you're going to get out of the rest of this room outside of Grant Delpit here in 2025, much like we didn't know what we were going to get out of the rest of the room besides Grant Delpit in 2024. To say this is the worst roster in the NFL, I'm sorry. I just cannot buy into it. The potential for the offensive line, the young running backs. Again, I'll take any of these quarterbacks. I will tell you right now, I don't even get to choose. You can tell me I can get one of these 4 quarterbacks, and you can pick the one of the 4 quarterbacks for me, and I will still take any one of them over the nightmare of the 3-year nightmare that was Deshaun Watson. So love my PFF folks. John Costco, we still homies. We'll always talk, but I'm not buying the Cleveland Browns roster as being the worst in the NFL. Now, I will piggyback off of that by saying it all comes down, certainly, to the quarterback. It always does. most important position in all professional sports. And for the Browns, it's obviously a great big mystery to this point. Do the Browns have the ideal plan on how they hope it works out? Do they have the idea plan on how they think it'll work out? There's a lot. There's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty. You know, could Joe Flacco, you know, relive that 2023 run, but somehow play cleaner with less turnovers and add more length to it, other than that little less than half a season run in 2023? Did Kenny Pickett's 1 year in Philly help him get to where, he needs to be to basically reestablish himself as a starting signal caller in the NFL? Can Dylan Gabriel find his way in this league as an undersized left-handed QB? Shedeur Sanders, for all his gifts, can he have people around him stop creating more white noise that he doesn't want to deal with and he shouldn't have to deal with any longer, so he can just go out and focus on, hopefully, establish himself as a potential starting quarterback in the NFL? There's a lot of talk about how people think it's going to work out. And I can't believe there's anybody that honestly thinks that the Cleveland Browns don't go into week one with at least Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel on the 53-man roster. Cleveland is not getting rid of either of these guys. It would make zero sense to anyway. Who bails on a quarterback that fast? Especially when we're talking about the Cleveland Browns and general manager Andrew Berry, who probably give more longevity and opportunity to their draft choices than any front office in the NFL. That's fact. They hold on. They give it time. That's usually one of the reasons why they like to draft as young as they do. So I think everybody just assumes incorrectly that the Browns would move on from one of these two kids, which, again, I don't see any single way that is the plan. I continue to tell you, the majority of the games at the quarterback position in 2025 will be started by Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel, either collectively or one of them singularly. So it comes down to Joe versus Kenny, in my opinion. And it comes down to Joe versus Kenny, getting maybe the first 4 games. And again, I keep saying, I don't think it's so much about if Joe Flacco beats out Kenny Pickett or Kenny Pickett beats out Joe Flacco. I think it ultimately comes down to whoever beats out the other, how long can they hold on to the gig and hold the kids at bay? Neither one of them need to sit. There could be a scenario where you said each one of them was probably capable of playing week one. They're 23 and they're 24 years old. Both have extensive playing resumes through college. Now, how does it work out if it's not Kenny or if it's not Joe between that battle, maybe between the two of them? Browns moved DTR and a 5th-round pick to Philadelphia to acquire Kenny Pickett. I think there's some people that just believe that, that just gives this safety net for Kenny Pickett. I don't think it does. And if it turned out that the Browns don't see it working with Kenny Pickett, whose contract would only be for the 2025 season anyway. So if they don't believe he's good enough to start for this team week 1, what in the world would you be keeping him around for anyway? You want to see Dylan Gabriel. You want to see Shedeur Sanders. A team like the New Orleans Saints certainly could have interest with new head coach Kellen Moore in bringing Kenny Pickett down to New Orleans. There are several other teams in the NFL that certainly would probably be interested in Kenny Pickett. So everybody that believes that the Browns, well, they gave up a pick for Kenny Pickett. It was a 5th-round pick. The Cleveland Browns could easily recoup a 5th-round pick if they decided to move on from Kenny Pickett. I'm not saying this is determining who's staying, who's going in any way whatsoever. But the Browns, could have moved on from DTR and gave up the 5th-round pick, for the, VIP early look-see of Kenny Pickett to see where he's at now. And I'm not going to lie. Sounds like Coach Stefanski's excited about having Kenny Pickett here. Speaks extremely high of Kenny Pickett. Speaks extremely well of Kenny Pickett. The way he handles himself. He certainly, carries himself like a pro. And it's hard to, understand that entire situation that went down with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the more you look at it and you think about it, you have a hard time believing that it was a Kenny Pickett issue and a Kenny Pickett issue alone. Pickens was an issue. Deontay Johnson was an issue. Several other issues, certainly, within the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. Still find a way to be successful every year, but it doesn't mean they haven't been dealing with a myriad of issues over the past few seasons. Now, if it turns out they did prefer Kenny Pickett over Joe, the situation with Joe Flacco and how you would handle it is certainly different. Because it wouldn't be as easy to trade Joe Flacco. You'd have to find, the team that maybe Joe was most interested in and see if that team, A, wants Joe, B, is willing to play ball. At this point, in Joe's life, I think there's a certain, if you guys remember when you were a senior in, high school and they said, all right, well, here's where you live, put the circle around where you live and find your college, hopefully somewhere within 2 hours of that vicinity. I think there's a certain, distance where Joe is comfortable with being away from his family who still reside predominantly in the South Jersey home in the area where Joe Flacco grew up. So if it turns out Kenny beats Joe, you most likely are in a difficult situation as far as trying to trade Joe Flacco, unless an opportunity within the area of where Joe Flacco's family resides comes available. It certainly would be possible. But it just does make it a little bit more difficult. And, with Joe being his age and, having several children and, dealing with school and sports and all of these things that, only if you have kids you understand about, right? So that certainly makes things a little bit more difficult. But again, I don't think it is so much necessarily about Joe Flacco beating out Kenny Pickett or Kenny Pickett beating out Joe Flacco. It's about Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco playing well enough out the gate and having this team record-wise at a position where the team still has to believe that, A, at our record and at the way we've been playing, we're contending. to hold off what is probably the Browns' ultimate plan here in 2025 is to get as many reps as possible to make determinations for Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. I think that is a huge, huge part of the entire plan for this 2025. And I'm going to be honest. I mean, with all that Shedeur is doing, his speaking, his, being fan friendly, sharing things to social media, obviously out and about and, working out in places and meeting some of the kids in the area. And the more these people want to conjure up and bring up, well, why did he slide? And, there were NFL owners that told their front offices, we don't want to draft this guy. I don't think I'm alone here when it essentially makes me want to root for Shadour even more. Mel Kiper's whole diatribe and all of that during the draft may have gotten long in the tooth. But Mel was not wrong. The whole thing was a farce. The whole thing was BS. But again, it doesn't matter now. And, some of the pictures that were trying to be painted of the type of young man that Shedeur Sanders was perceived to be, for all of us here, Browns-wise, we ain't seen a glimpse of that kid in 6 weeks. I haven't seen it since Browns selected him. We saw a kid who showed ultimate relief that terrible, agonizing weekend was finally behind him. A kid who wants to succeed in professional football like his father did. I think that is all Shadour cares about right now is how soon can I get behind center? And if it's for the Cleveland Browns, heck yeah, I don't care. You got to keep in mind, he was at Jackson State. Wasn't a great program. He was at Colorado. Unless you're old like me and you remember who Darian Hagan and Eric Bieniemy are, Colorado's been a doormat. But Coach Prime and Shadour, Travis Hunter, they didn't just breathe life into that program. They brought it back from the damn dead. So with all this naysayer and all this negative stuff and, all these people trying to, rehash this stuff that nobody wants to talk about anymore, my fondness for Shadour grows. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. Do I want to throw them against the, and I think everybody talks about the early slate as far as the schedule. And I get it. Weeks 2, 3, and 4 seem kind of tough. I mean, I'm not that upset about, I mean, you can tell me I'm nervous about Cincinnati week 1 at home. I've seen the Bengals pee down their own leg plenty of times against the Cleveland Browns that I don't really have that much cause of concern. I do have cause of concern about things like, the Cleveland Browns offensive drives last year either ended in a punt or a turnover 70% of the time. Yeah, that's stuff I care about. That's stuff that concerns me wholeheartedly. We will get media back in tomorrow, Wednesday, for OTAs. And again, who knows where it's going to take us. I think we have, everybody's kind of, seems to kind of have their flags planted. And again, I want this to be a 4-man competition. That's all I want. I want this to be a 4-man competition. And whoever looks the best, let's give them the ball week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals and see where the season takes us. For me, it doesn't have to be a Joe Flacco. It doesn't have to be a Kenny Pickett. It could be a Dylan Gabriel. It could be a Shedeur Sanders. Let's take this from the middle of May to the end of August, say 12, 13 weeks, whatever. Over that period of time, who was the best? And if that's the case, there's your week 1 starter. Don't work out, go with another guy. That guy don't work out, go with the other guy. For me, it really is that simple. Give the ball to the guy you think is playing the best. Certainly going to have to, be a lot of factors to help this. The offensive line. And these guys really seem excited about going back to the old system. That's fine. But, these guys are all a little bit older now. DeJuan Jones, trying to prove he can be a starter at left tackle, which I think he can handle. And let's be honest, the Browns were comfortable with Jedrick Wills as long as they were. It's not like, I would say DeJuan Jones is probably already better. So anything DeJuan Jones can give you out of the left tackle position is probably going to be certainly better than what you weren't getting from Jedrick Wills. Why DeJuan Jones on the left side? Cleveland Browns, for the most part, like to predominantly run the ball on the right side. Jack Conklin is a fantastic run blocker. Jack Conklin's athleticism is a really good fit in Kevin Stefanski's wide zone scheme. I should just say the wide zone scheme. Let's not give Coach Stefanski credit like he came up with it, right? But the weakness of DeJuan Jones now, and may always be, is going to be run blocking. You got to be super quick at the point of attack, and you got to be able to get low. To his credit, DeJuan Jones is doing a fantastic job keeping his weight under control. But there's nothing DeJuan Jones can do about the fact that he's going to always be 6'9" and somewhere north of 350 pounds. There's nothing he can do about it. It's genetics. He's a monster of a human being. So elite quickness to the point of attack is probably going to be something that's always going to be just something that's unattainable for DeJuan Jones. Being able to, get low and maneuver through traffic to get a strafing linebacker, it's probably going to be things that DeJuan Jones is always going to struggle with. Plus, for him at left tackle, call the mountain theory. How long does it take for you to run around the mountain? As long as he takes his drops correctly. His footwork tells you that should not be an issue. You got fresh blood in the running back room with a guy like Jerome Ford who's shown that he can be a guy that gives you some decent production. We saw a really good amount of it in 23. He was one of the lone bright spots on the offense in 2024. Jerry Jeudy, if you get Cedric Tillman to play at a more consistent level, you get anything out of Deontay Johnson. And again, most importantly, you cannot have 70% of your drives resulting in a punt or a turnover. It's just lunacy. It's absurd. Embarrassing. Not lying, it's the truth, right? So, we'll get back at it this week. Mini camp coming a little after that. And one more round of OTAs that I think end right around, I say the 19th. Sound about right? Right? The first steps in hopefully, a much better 2025 season, which again does not necessarily have to be record-wise. Just has to be a team that's going to show the ability to go out week in, week out and fight like hell for 60 minutes. We can understand they may not have enough talent to be winners in 2025. But you're professionals and you get paid well. Least you can do is show up and perform your job for 60 minutes. And I think without number 4 around, I think the harmony of the Cleveland Browns locker room is at a lot better place than it was before St. Patrick's Day of 2022. As always, we appreciate all of you. who give us your time, your ears, your eyes to read all the wonderful content that comes out on the OBR each and every day from our fantastic group of writers, are joining us every evening here on the OBR streaming network beginning at 6 o'clock, starting with Browns 3D, hosted by myself. It is Tuesday. Like I said, you will get the React with Brad and Pete Smith. You will also have a shorter version of Garage Beers at 9 while Mike Keefe is out enjoying a little family time. Be good, Mike. Enjoy. Sorry you had to go see Lindor in person playing for the Mets. But this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to y'all tomorrow.